I've had a lot of hyperfixations throughout my life. I think the first one I can remember is Alice in Wonderland. When the Tim Burton movie came out in 2010, I was hooked. I sought out every single version of Alice in Wonderland on film, on paper that I could find, and I consumed all of it over and over and over again, obsessively. And after that, I sort of just continued to shift from hyperfixation to hyperfixation. I think after that, it was Jurassic Park, and then it was The Legend of Zelda. That one's still around today. And I think what drew me to all of these respective series was, or not even series, but just reproductions of the same product over and over again over time, was that they all had the same baseline formula, but things would change from film to film, and I've always found that very interesting. For example, The Legend of Zelda always has Link, it always has Zelda, it's always in Hyrule, it always has a desert, a forest, a mountain, a water area, dungeons, a villain, the Triforce. But each of the games is so different from the rest. And I don't know, I've just always found it very fascinating how a series can evolve and be reborn in all of these different ways, but remain interesting and remain compelling from version to version. And one of these many hyperfixations was with the James Bond movies. I think it started with the Bond video games like GoldenEye, not the N64 version, but the really bizarre remake for the Wii that was kind of like Call of Duty. I don't know, something about them clicked, and after playing the game and loving it so much, and playing a really niche video game called 007 Legends, I've got to find that. It was on the Wii U. I don't know where it is or really if anybody else in the world played it, but I played the hell out of that game. But because of those video games, I sought out the movie series. Before I had seen even a single film, I had asked my parents to buy me the complete Bond Blu-ray collection. And they were willing because they really liked the films. I have one of the things here. It came in two of these big, beautiful books, covered in dog hair, that have all of the movies in them, with the years and the different Bonds and different iterations. And given what I said before, Bond was kind of the perfect hyperfixation for me, because at this time there were 24 movies, there are now 26. And each of the movies have the same general formula. There's Bond, there's a villain in each movie, there's always a love interest or several, there's new gadgets every movie. And something about that formula, seeing how it changed over time, really scratched an itch in my brain. So I watched many of them at the time. How old was I? 10? 12? Probably 12. But I think it's been at least like 8 years since I've watched most of these films. And because I'm the same person and I continue to have hyperfixations today, I thought it would be really fun to deep dive all of these films, see what makes each of them good, compare them on the core aspects that run throughout the series, see how different actors and different decades treat the series over time, and just overly analyze it for no reason at all. So I'm going to be watching all of the movies in chronological order, and I came up with a formula to rate each of the films according to their different core aspects and calculate total scores for them, because I think it'll be really fun to compare them in each category and see which Bond films come out on top, because some of these movies are really fucking good. Like, I continue to feel that way, and I'm so excited to revisit a lot of these because I think they're really, really great. But some of them are clunkers. Like, I remember some of these being shockingly bad. So those will be really fun to revisit too. I've come up with these main categories to analyze, rate each of the films. The first category is plot. That's sort of just the place where I'll be able to consider the movie as a whole, the action sequences that happen in it, the conflict, you know, the character development, just basically everything about the movie that isn't these other ones I'm gonna name. And I'll give that a rating out of 10. And when I calculate the total average for the film as a whole, I'm gonna double weight the plot score because I think that makes sense and it'll be a good indication of how the movie was overall. The second category is the intro. Every James Bond movie has an opening credit sequence with a different song, many of which are so good. It's basically like a music video to a song of a contemporary artist of when the movie came out, with like these beautiful graphics and like designs and animations and just all this stuff going on, and they're really, really iconic. This is one of my favorite things about the series. So I'll rate the intro out of 10, and I'll just weight that once in the total average. Then I will rate the movie's treatment of the love interests. Bond usually has more than one love interest that he sleeps with, meets up with, runs away from when they try to kill him in every film, and I think it will be interesting to analyze how good these characters are. I'm going to be rating them according to, I mean, like, I guess attractiveness will be part of it. I'm gay, so it'll be through a lens of, you know, whatever I'm able to see and perceive. But also, I'm interested in how deep the characters are, if they're treated as objects, or if they're sort of given their own depth and development and backstory and all this stuff like that. So I'll be pretty thoughtful about how I rate each film's treatment of the women in it. And I'll just weight the score for Bond girls once in the total average. Next is villains. Each film tends to have a really iconic villain with their own motivations and quirks and characteristics, and I'm really interested in seeing what their motivations are and how they function and what they do and how scary they are and how they challenge James. So that'll be really fun to examine. I will rate the villains in each film out of 10 and weight that once in the total average. And then finally, I will rate the gadgets in each film. In every film, as far as I know, Q provides James with some fun, crazy gadgets that seem incredibly random, but he ends up being able to use in super hyper-specific niche ways by the end of the movie. And those are really fun, but also sometimes they're stupid, so it'll be fun to see what those gadgets are and rate those out of 10. But I'll only account for those half as much in the total average because I don't want how good or bad the gadgets are to really like tank or boost a movie score too much, because that just seems weird. I think that's it for intro stuff. I'm really, really excited to get into this. I think it's going to be really, really fun. So yeah, let's go. I'm going to try to find something in my closet to represent each of the films, but I'm not really sure how that's going to go. There's 26 of them, so I might run out of things at work pretty quick, but I think this is a good one for Dr. No. It's inspired by the eponymous villain of the film, Dr. No himself. He's wearing this really sleek, like full white jumpsuit type thing that's kind of this color, so this is the outfit for Dr. No. I really liked this movie. I think it's amazing that the first James Bond movie ever is so good and so well made and so well done and so fun and interesting to see. It is inspired by the Ian Fleming novel of the same name, Dr. No, which came out 4 years before this movie did. Which interestingly is not the first James Bond book. I think it's like the 6th one, but all the ones before it later got made into movies. So anyway, it's interesting that they decided to start with this one, but I think it was a really amazing choice. I can't stress enough, this movie was so good. It was so fun to watch. So let's just get into it. The plot is so engaging. I was literally glued to the screen the whole time. I think the central conflict of the movie was really interesting and scary and had high stakes about, missiles being toppled by a mysterious base somewhere on these Jamaican islands. And the pacing of the movie was really, really good. It felt like the pacing of a novel, which I said that to my boyfriend, and he was like, what do you mean by that? And I guess I'm not really sure. It might just be like that old movie vibe where the pacing feels kind of slower and it gives every single moment room to breathe and like have its moment, and it feels like chapter to chapter. So I don't know, but it was very pleasing, very enjoyable to watch. There's some really awesome action moments in this movie. There's a car chase towards the beginning of the film when James first gets to Jamaica that is so cool. I mean, the stunt driving is incredible in this movie. And there's some really cool like spy moments, like when James pulls out one of his hairs and like licks it and sticks it to the closet to see if anyone has like come into his room and searched through everything, which they do, and he knows because the hair's gone later. There's a really scary moment in this movie where a tarantula gets put into James's bed. That part's fucking terrifying. It's awful. But yeah, the plot and everything about this movie I felt like was really, really strong. There's a lot of amazing attention to detail, like I mentioned with the hair, and just a lot of good like setup, payoff moments. When one of James's sidekicks in this movie named Coral gets killed, you really feel it. Like, it comes out of nowhere. It feels really tragic. It's really frightening. And I think that's important because a lot of times in action movies people die and it's just like, oh no, whatever. But this one was like, oh my god, you feel it. I love the sets in this movie. There's a lot of gorgeous, luxurious 60s hotel rooms and like laboratories and parts of the compound, and it's a vibe. It's really fun to immerse yourself into. And the movie has a hell of a climax. The way it ends is really exciting and nail-biting, and the payoff is incredible, and you definitely leave it feeling like you've experienced something very thrilling and exciting and just fun. It's so good. So I gave the plot a score of 9 out of 10, and I think it's well deserved. Unfortunately, I think like I won't really know how I want to be rating these things until I continue going and I'm able to compare to the ratings I've given before. But 9 out of 10 feels right. I guess I want to save 10s for things that were really, really deeply moving, I guess. I guess if there's one thing this movie lacked, it wasn't very emotionally resonant or, you know, tear-jerking. Not that it has to be that specifically, but I think you know what I mean. So I didn't do 10 out of 10 because I guess I could have felt something more profound. But the plot was really good and really clean and very well crafted. So 9 out of 10 felt like a good rating for the plot. The intro, I have to give them credit for it being the first Bond movie intro ever. I mean, this movie, this girl, set the precedent for the entirety of the rest of the series. But I guess when I consider the intro, I'm going to be thinking about the song as well as the graphics and sort of just the overall experience of it. The music is amazing. It's just the classic Bond theme, which is always a pleasure to hear. It's so good. It's so fun. And there's a lot of fun, like very 60s blinking lights and circles flashing all over the place and the names popping up and changing their orientation, and just, it's cool. It's fun. There's some like dancers, presumably Jamaican dancers, because that's where the film takes place, that are silhouetted in like these neon technicolor shadows that are all dancing on top of each other. So it was very cool, fairly simple compared to what I know they become later. I did only give the intro a 4 out of 10 because I know where things go, and I think there was definitely a lot of room for it to be more interesting, more exciting, and more memorable. It's a little bit forgettable. It's cool when you're seeing it, but then you kind of forget about it, and it's definitely not the strongest point of the film. So I gave the intro 4 out of 10. Now the girls in the movie. I have to say, I was not expecting the women in this movie to be interesting at all. I mean, this came out in 1962. I know that, Bond content can tend to objectify women a lot, and that's very real, and I want to reflect that in the ratings because it should tank a movie if they treat women poorly. But I have to say, this movie's treatment of the love interest was really, really good. Okay, so there are 2 main Bond girls in this movie that I decided to focus on. The first one is Sylvia Trench, which you have to give her credit for establishing the whole James Bond thing, because I think James asks for her name and she says Trench, Sylvia Trench. So then he goes Bond, James Bond. She's the reason we have it. She deserves the credit. But she was very beautiful. She was confident. She was powerful. She was interesting. She seemed like she had a lot going on behind the scenes. And there's an iconic moment where James comes into his hotel room where he's staying, and she's wearing one of his dress shirts, only one of his dress shirts, and she looks amazing, gorgeous, and she's wearing these gold high heels with it, and she's playing croquet. It's so good. It's so good. But really what most people consider to be the main Bond girl of this film, because Sylvia isn't around for a ton of the movie, is Honey Rider, starting the Bond trend of the women having ridiculous names. Again, I was sort of expecting her to be a nothing character. I didn't really know or remember if she had a lot going on, but I have to say she was really, really good. She was strong, she was formidable, she carried a knife and she wasn't afraid to use it and defend herself. She clearly knew what she wanted. She wasn't just an object for James' affection. She had her own personality and motives, and a very tragic and traumatizing backstory that she is still processing and working through, and it influences the way that she acts a lot. So she was a very, very interesting character, and gorgeous, obviously. She was very smart at several points throughout the movie. James didn't know anything about like the island they were on, but she did. She knew everything about all the animals and the threats they were gonna face. She was a real like intellectual tool in this movie, and I thought that was pretty amazing stuff. Admittedly, she does by the end up being a bit of a damsel in distress. She's chained up and James has to come save her, which I guess isn't terrible, but it's something. But they get out, and then the movie ends with them making out in the tugboat, and it's great. It's fun. So all of that being said, I think there's definitely a little more room for the Bond girls to be developed more and have more of a role in the film. She wasn't in a ton of it and didn't do a lot, even though she did some really important stuff. So in spite of that, I think this was a really, really strong start for the Bond girls. So I gave the movie's treatment of women an 8 out of 10. The villain, the eponymous villain named after, or who the film is named after, Dr. No. He's a half Chinese, half German scientist, mad scientist, I suppose, but he's not crazy. He's very demure, dare I say, and very thoughtful and clear about his intentions. He has a very unsettling and forebodingly monotone voice that you don't see him until towards the end of the film, but you do hear him like give commands over an intercom and like interrogate people, and it's scary. Like, it's really like, oh my god, this person is a force to be reckoned with. Like, he's really intimidating. One of his cool traits, I guess, is he's lost his hands to his work with radiation. So he has these black metal hands that he has full dexterity over. At one point at dinner with James, he picks up this like golden idol and he just like crushes it in his hand, and it's super cool. And he is our first introduction to Spectre, which is the driving villain organization throughout the entire series, I believe. So it's really cool that we get to see that from the very beginning. His motives are interesting, they make sense. It's clear why he's trying to topple these American missiles and how it's sort of a ploy to create global chaos and assert his own power, and it makes sense, it's interesting. And the way he dies is crazy. He gets boiled in radioactive water because there's this nuclear cooler, like the nuclear power rods are being cooled in a pool of water, and James totally like overloads them and overpowers them, which causes the facility to blow up. But before that, it just makes all of the water boil, and they're both wrestling and about to get pushed in the water, and James pushes him down, and James is able to climb out, but his metal hands just slip along the metal as he slides into the water. Oh my god, that's crazy. I feel like considering how the villains die in these movies is going to be part of it, because they die in some pretty ridiculous ways sometimes. I'm looking at you, live and let die. We'll get to that. All that being said, I think there's more room for him to be in more of the movie and be a little more developed. We don't get to get really deep into his character, but he's still very interesting, and the mystery surrounding him sort of is what drives the intrigue. So I rated the villain of this film a 7 out of 10. Gadgets. This is really hard for me because there really aren't any gadgets in this movie. James does receive his iconic pistol, the Walter PPK, and he does have a silencer later on that he uses, and it's cool. But beyond that, he doesn't really have... He has a watch, though. I didn't really get what was happening with the watch, to be honest. So clearly it wasn't interesting enough to... It, like, glowed, or had, like, a Geiger counter in it, maybe? I don't know. But unfortunately, and I hate doing this because I want this movie to get a really high score because I liked it so much, but I don't think I can give the gadget score more than a 2 out of 10 because there literally weren't any gadgets. I didn't do a 1 because I don't know what will receive a 1, maybe if a movie has really stupid, boring gadgets, but the pistol's cool. You have to give respect where it's due for the, iconic Walter PPK. But beyond that, I can't really give the gadgets a high score because they don't exist. So 2 out of 10. I'm glad I'm only weighting it half, but but still, it's painful. So, all of that considered, if I average out all of the scores, it calculates into a total score for Dr. No of 6.91 out of 10, which feels low. It's definitely dragged down by the intro only getting a 4 out of 10 and the Gadget score dragging it down just a little bit. I guess it's valid, it makes sense overall, and I chose the metrics that I'm rating according to, so I have to stick to them. But yeah, this movie's really, really good. I definitely would recommend it as a starting point if you're planning on watching all of the series. It's a wonderful place to start. It was really, really good. We'll probably watch one soon here that I would actually recommend as someone's first Bond movie, because it's just so good that if you don't enjoy it, you know that you won't enjoy any of the other ones. But yeah, this was really fun. I really enjoyed Dr. No, and I'm excited to see how the very first James Bond movie stands up against some of the ones that come later. Good boy. Oh, good job. I was really conflicted about what to wear for this film, because going in, I thought I would have to find something Russian aesthetically in my closet, but none of this film takes place in Russia. Most of it takes place in Turkey, in Istanbul. Some of it's in Venice, some of it's in London, obviously. So I decided to go with what might be a Turkish sort of vibe. Vaguely reminds me of one of the mosques they visit in the film that is absolutely gorgeous. So anyway, this is the outfit for From Russia with Love. This film was a mixed bag for me, I think. There's a lot to get into, a lot to talk about, so I guess I'll just go through the categories like normal. Like the movie as a whole, the plot itself was a mixed bag. I would say that the first half, or even 2/3 of the film, were really, really strong plot-wise, but it did start to drag towards the end, and I'll get into that. First of all, the opening of the film is incredible, in my opinion. It starts with one of the central villains of the film, Donald Grant, tracking James through a forest, and there's these twigs snapping, and it's very suspenseful, and eventually he catches up to James and kills him with a fiber wire. But then it's revealed that it was just an exercise, an act. They peel the Sean Connery mask off of the poor actor. I don't know if he actually got killed or something. But it's pretty wild to have the film begin with James Bond being killed, and I think it establishes really well what this particular villain is capable of, and that he's a force to be reckoned with. The sets in this film are absolutely astonishing. Like I mentioned, there's these beautiful Venetian sets, where they play the chess game early in the film. A lot of beautiful locations in Turkey, like the mosque that they go to, or the Turkish canals under the embassy, which is amazing. And also there's a very lengthy... What are you doing? What are you doing? It's right here. There's a very lengthy train sequence that it's a vibe. It's a gorgeous train. The central conflict of the film is really interesting, I think. We get to see more of Spectre, and their scheme is an interesting one. It's about luring James, or MI6 in general, to Turkey to steal a Russian decoder machine called a Lecter. But ultimately Spectre is doing all of the acting within the scheme, but then they're trying to pin it on the various countries and put them against each other. And there's this really interesting metaphor about these two fish that are fighting each other and exhausting each other before a third party comes in and takes advantage of their weakness to, get the upper hand, which is a wonderful metaphor for Spectre as a whole. So it's a very interesting one. I liked the driving conflict of the story. And I guess this is a good first time to mention that this movie is horny. There is so much like sex and innuendo and flirting, way more than there ever was in Dr. No. And I have some complicated feelings about it that I think we'll get into more when I talk about the Bond girls, but James do be getting down and dirty in this movie. The cinematography in this movie was gorgeous. It was very beautifully shot. It was a pleasure to watch. And I don't know, I think the plot was made interesting because there was so much espionage going on, people following and tracking each other, and a lot of different actors within the grander scheme, and betrayals and double agents and all this stuff going on that made it really exciting to follow along with. It was very, very interesting. There's a cool extended sequence when they go to a Romani camp in Turkey, although that's not the word they use. And then there's this interesting fight between two of the women that I'll talk about more in the Bond Girl section because it really affected my score for how the movie treats women. Yikes. But after that complex situation that I'll talk about a little bit later on, there's this really thrilling gunfight in the camp that's really crazy, and like the main villain of the movie, or one of the main villains of the movie, the agent that killed the fake James at the beginning, is protecting James throughout the fight and like sniping people that are about to kill him. And James is kind of like, what is this like guardian angel situation going on? And it's very fun to watch, especially because we know more about it than James does. So it's really pleasurable to kind of be in the know in that way. There's an amazing sequence in this gorgeous, vast mosque where all these different agents are following each other, and then one of them gets killed by who you think is James, but it turns out that it was the Spectre agent that killed the Russian agent, and James finds his body and he's like, who did that? And it's really, really cool. It does drag a bit towards the end. The last 40 minutes was a little bit hard to get through. It just slowed down a lot, and a lot of the payoffs just weren't as fulfilling as I would have liked them to be. The plot did wrap up by the end in an interesting and satisfying enough way, but I don't know, it became boring and a little bit too convenient the way a lot of these things wrapped up towards the end. Like, oh, okay, clearly like James is supposed to come out on top here because the villains make some decisions that are less intelligent than they've been established to be, so it's a little bit too in James's favor to feel satisfying, I think. So as a whole, I enjoyed the plot. It was good, it was an interesting story, but there was some of the pacing issues and some complications with the way characters are treated or underdeveloped. So I gave the plot a 7 out of 10. It was good overall. And there's some really exciting moments, but there were enough non-exciting moments to drag the score down to a 7, which I feel like is fair. The intro, okay. This was really fun. The intro is like always such an exciting way to start a Bond movie. They're always so thrilling and enjoyable to witness. The main like gimmick of this intro sequence was there were a lot of like neon technicolor projections of like all of the names of the opening credits, but there were bodies coming in and out and dancing in front of the projections, so the names are kind of like bending and dancing on these nude female bodies, and it was really cool. I think it fits in with like the theme and the setting of the film, and you know, just a lot of like legs coming in and out or bellies rolling over these names. It was cool. The coloring was gorgeous. I really, really loved the color grading of the projections. But the theme was a little uninteresting. The movie does have a theme song from Russia with Love, which I think is a beautiful song. I really like it. It plays during the end credits. I don't know why they didn't use it for the opening credits, because I think that would have made it more interesting. But the theme was kind of just the standard, like, Bond stuff, but not even as good as it was in Dr. No. And it was, you couldn't really, like, read a lot of the names. Like, they would just be, like, rolling over these bodies, and you're like, okay, this is cool, but, like, I mean, not that you really care much about reading the names, maybe, but I don't know, it seemed a little bit impractical. And once the charm of it wore off, it was just a couple minutes of like, okay, cool. So I decided to give the intro an overall rating of 4 out of 10. That just feels right. I know how good these can be, so, you know, I'm trying to discipline myself and be fair with the ratings and leave the higher scores for the ones that deserve it, and unfortunately this was not one of them. Okay, the Bond girls, the way the movie treats women. First of all, a moment that I really, really liked is the first time we see the real James in the movie. He's laying in a boat with Sylvia Trench from the last film, which I thought was really cool. I think it's a beautiful thing when Bond girls get to carry over from film to film. And, you know, they were very flirtatious, but she still felt like a real character in the little bit we got to see her. She's not around for very long, but I appreciated that she was there. It was kind of cool. Okay, other than that, before I talk about the main Bond girl that's in, like, the entire movie, I want to talk about the Romani women that we see when James is in the Romani camp, because it's like a cultural tradition that when two women have a conflict over a man, they like fight to the death and have like this very physical clawing match to see who gets to be with him. And these women like hate each other. Like as soon as they walk out and are facing each other, one of them pounces on the other one because he's just like, I hate this person. But then the women get offered to James by the leader of the camp, and then they're just like super fine with being with each other, and they're just like treating James, and they're just like fawning all over him and touching him, and it comes off as really strange. They're definitely treated as sexual objects. They don't even speak. They have no character, and it feeds into James's weird like threesome fantasy. And I don't know, it was very shallow, and I didn't appreciate it at the time. Now, the main girl in the movie, her name is Tatiana Romanova, or Romanova, as James says it. I don't know if that's the right way. I don't like it as much, so I'm gonna say Romanova. She, when she's introduced, seems like a very interesting, very developed, very deep character. She's smart, she's thoughtful, she's brave, she's composed. She is extremely seductive. She's gorgeous, first of all. But it's weird because sort of as a result of her assignment, she is used as a sexual pawn throughout the entire film. In the moments when she's flirting with James, it comes off as like, okay, the film seems to be like objectifying her and like covering over all of her nuance or what's interesting about her personality. But that's like what she's supposed to be doing, you know? Like it is her mission, and it's all in the name of the assignment and the work that she's been given. But that's not explored or pointed out, and you have to like remember that in order for it to be qualified, because the film doesn't point out the nuance or the complication there. Throughout the entire film, she has virtually no agency. James is constantly ordering her around, telling her what to do. When he finds out what she's actually doing, he like slaps her. I mean, it didn't feel good to see James just like whoosh her across the face. It seemed uncalled for. It was bizarre, and she just kind of like shrinks into the corner and pretty much doesn't talk for like the rest of the movie. So it doesn't feel good. She gets roofied by the Spectre agent Grant. I don't know. None of it felt good. So, you know, if I'm rating the movie according to how it treats women, I would say not very well at all. This is sort of what I was expecting Dr. No to be like, but Dr. No was a surprise because the women in that movie were really powerful and interesting, but this movie dropped the ball. It had some good moments, there were glimpses of, interesting things, but I don't feel good about giving the film more than a 3 out of 10. Okay, the villain, or especially in this movie, villains. Another complicated category. Okay, first of all, we get to see our first glimpse of Blofeld, who I don't know if he's named in this movie. But number 1, the leader of Spectre. We only see his middle body and the white cat in his lap, which is his iconic symbol. It's really cool. It's very mysterious. You can tell that even the most formidable villains in the movie are really intimidated by him and scared of him, as they should be. So he's not in that much of it, but he is the person kind of moving all the pieces behind the scenes, and I think that will build and pay off more in the subsequent films, if I remember right. I don't remember super well. So I like that. He was cool, but there's not really much to say about him. Donald Grant is the main acting villain in the story. He's following James throughout the film and protecting him throughout most of the movie because he wants to kill him himself. He's at his best when he's silent and very just cold and not saying anything. He's very unfeeling. He gets punched with brass knuckles at the beginning and doesn't even flinch, and it's cool. He's a very, attractive, bold, strong villain. But as soon as he opens his mouth, he loses me. He just becomes really boring. He doesn't have any interesting motives beyond, following the orders he's been given by Spectre, which makes sense, but, it doesn't make for an interesting villain in a movie if he's just following orders and we don't even, get to see much of the people that are ordering him around and actually have the motives and the reasons for what they're doing. I don't know, the way he gets defeated and tricked by James seems really unrealistic. He is really smart throughout the movie until James just asks for a cigarette and says, "I'll give you the coins in my briefcase if you let me have a cigarette." And then James uses his briefcase to blow up tear gas in his face, which is it works, it's cool, but it doesn't really make sense why Grant would fall for something like that, especially because he's the best agent that Spectre has to offer. It seems really pointless and stupid, and it's not exciting or satisfying the way that James comes out on top. The other villain in the film who I liked the most was Rosa Klebb. She's number 3 in Spectre, and she is the head of SMERSH in the Soviet Union. So basically the highest ranking general in the Soviet Union, but she's defected to Spectre. And she was very interesting. I liked her a lot. We didn't get to see her a ton, but she's very tough, very mean and cutting, and I don't know, I liked her. She has this really cool fight with James at the end where she has this poison-tipped knife come out of her shoe and she's trying to kick him. She's disguised as a maid of this hotel in Venice that he ends up in at the end, and she gets bested by Tatiana Romanova, which is a cool moment and interesting betrayal, and she was really good. I really liked her, and it seemed like she had more interesting, complex motives throughout the film, especially compared to Agent Grant. So I liked Rosa Klebb. She was cool, but I think the movie suffers as a whole by kind of not having one really strong villain, so it prevents the villains in the film from being all that interesting. So I gave the film a 6 out of 10. They were good, they were fine, there were some cool moments with them, but I know that there's room for them to be better and more interesting. So 6 out of 10. Gadgets. Unlike Dr. No, this movie actually had gadgets for the first time, which is really cool. There's these bullets that hide in James's briefcase. There's a knife that will slide out of one of the sides. He has a folding sniper hidden in it. These gold coins that slide out on this little reel, which is what he uses to bribe Grant. And there's like you have to open the briefcase in a really specific way, otherwise a can of tear gas will detonate in the person's face. So that's a cool, thing. The setup is very interesting. You're like, oh my god, I can't wait to see how all this turns out. But then he ends up using like all of the gadgets in like 2 minutes on Agent Grant in just super overly convenient, perfect ways. And, the gadgets can't be rated that highly if the payoff is just like, cool, he did it. He uses the folding sniper on a helicopter that's pursuing them at the end, and it's cool, it blows up and it's crazy, but it's just like not that unique or interesting. So gadgets get a 3 out of 10 from me. So that's all of the categories for From Russia with Love, and if I average them according to the way I'm weighting every category, the total score for From Russia with Love is 5.18 out of 10. It really got tanked by having a lackluster intro, lame gadgets, underdeveloped villains, and poor treatment of women. So, even the plot getting a 7 out of 10 and being double weighted couldn't save this movie from getting a relatively low score. And, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. I kind of slayed with this one, right? I mean, I think Goldfinger wears this exact shirt in the movie. Okay, this movie, it was really interesting to rewatch it. I've probably seen Goldfinger more than most other Bond movies. It's kind of like the one, Many people say it's the best Bond movie ever. Certainly people say it's the best Sean Connery James Bond movie. So, going in, I had high expectations, and largely they paid off, but there were some things that I didn't quite remember that came as a shock. So I'm excited to talk about that as well. Okay, first off, the plot category. And if you remember, this is kind of just my place to talk about anything in the film that isn't covered by the other categories. So I'm calling it plot, but also, there's room for like personal feelings about the movie and costumes and settings and, stuff like that. And also the plot as well, obviously. The costumes in this movie are so good. The first opportunity to talk about it is the towel romper that James wears when he's in Miami at the beginning of the movie. I need it so bad. I would be wearing that right now if I had it. And all of the suits that he wears. He starts the film in a white suit, which I think is a first for the series, and he looks amazing. I love the sweater he wears when he goes golfing with Goldfinger later on. Costumes were really, really solid in this film. I loved the fashion design. There's an incredible car chase on Goldfinger's base. One of my favorite moments of the movie is when the old lady running the road checkpoint comes out with an AK-47 and starts shooting at James. It's so good. And then they get James to crash his car by putting a mirror at the end of an alleyway. So he's playing chicken with a car that's coming towards him, and he doesn't realize until they're about to hit that it's a reflection of his own Aston Martin, and he crashes into the wall, and he gets captured, and he gets strapped to the table with the laser going up to cut him in half, which is one of the best scenes in any Bond movie. It's so iconic, so good. You have to give props to Do You Expect Me to Talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. Never been done before. So good. Goldfinger's base in Kentucky is really cool. The way the room slides around and reveals the different dioramas and maps of his plan. The nerve gas is a really interesting tool that he's going to use in order to neutralize everyone in and around Fort Knox so that he can nuke the gold and devalue it, which is a crazy scheme that I think is really interesting and really exciting. The scene where they're dropping the nerve gas, wink wink, but they're not, and everyone passes out, it's so fun, it's so campy, it's so good. Okay, and here's where it gets a little complicated. The plot twist that Pussy Galore betrays Goldfinger and switches out the nerve gas for something totally inert, I don't even know what they use instead, but it doesn't do anything, is a shocking twist, but the reason she does it is too problematic for me to completely ignore. It did bring down my ranking of the plot of the movie at least a little bit. I more punished the movie for this in the Bond Girl section, and I'll talk about it more there. But her motives in betraying Goldfinger are ridiculous and terrible, to be honest. But in spite of that, the twist is, it's interesting, it's a cool moment when everyone that should be dead, like these 60,000 or 40,000 people on the Fort Knox base that are lying there dead, just get up because they were all faking it, is amazing. So it's a good payoff, it's very tense, disarming the bomb, it's a really cool moment. The clock stops on 007, I mean, come on, that's amazing. And the end of the movie is pretty good. I like the way that he defeats the villains. We'll talk more about that in their section, but overall it ended pretty well. So all of that considered, it was a very enjoyable movie to watch. I liked it in spite of the complicated things we'll get into later, but there's a lot of iconic moments. It's a good story, it's fun to watch, it's interesting, the twists and turns are very exciting, very good. So I did give the plot an 8 out of 10. I think I would have given it like a 9 out of 10 if it were not for Pussy's betrayal of Goldfinger, which was simply too bad to ignore. So 8 out of 10 seems perfectly reasonable to me, and I think is as high as I'd be willing to go with this film. The intro, I was really looking forward to this one. It's probably the one I remember best. It is so iconic. First of all, you have to give props to maybe the best Bond theme song ever. Such an earworm. Every time you hear it in the score throughout the movie, it's like, oh my god. And the way the credits are presented is there is all of these gold painted bodies, which at this point in the movie means something to you. And it's all these beautiful women that are completely caked in gold paint. And it's so cool, all the different sexy shots you get of different parts of their bodies with the opening credits scrolling on the screen. I do think the intro is incredible, but admittedly there is more room for it to be a little more complex and dynamic, but I have to give credit where credit is due. It's a really solid intro, definitely the best one so far by a landslide. But I did give it a 7 out of 10 because I know that they get more complicated, more dynamic, more interesting as the series goes on. So 7 out of 10 seemed reasonable. Okay, the Bond Girl section. Guys, this was really bad. I was honestly, genuinely surprised because I didn't remember it being this bad. But, you know, I haven't seen this movie in quite a while, and I haven't watched it with a mature mind, I suppose. And I don't think it's overly sensitive to say that the movie's treatment of women is pretty rough. One of the first women James is with is named Dink. She just massages James and then gets told to go away because they need to have man talk, and he spanks her and she walks away, which isn't like, you know, it's whatever. It's not great, but there's not really anything there as far as her character goes. Jill Masterson, cool character. It's cool the way she's working for Goldfinger, but betrays him when James wants to have sex with her. fascinating. And she dies pretty quickly because she gets covered in gold paint and suffocated, which is iconic and amazing, but those points go to Goldfinger and not to this section. And then you think there's going to be an interesting moment because later Jill's sister Tilly is seeking revenge for her sister's death, but she dies like right away. She's barely in the movie. Oddjob kills her very quickly, and that's just the end of that arc. It's very underdeveloped. We get introduced to one of the most iconic Bond women for sure. Her name is Pussy Galore. I mean, that's just ridiculous and hilarious, I guess. And I'm not even marking the movie down for her name being insane. You know, I guess it's fine. It's just funny. It's not that serious. And it helps that at first she is a very strong and formidable character. She's very self-assured. She knows what she wants. She knows how to get it. So I love that. There's a really great moment where James is peeping into Goldfinger's diorama of Fort Knox when he's talking about the plan, and Pussy comes up behind him and just grabs his legs and he fucking face plants into the metal. This is where it gets complicated. So Goldfinger asks Pussy to seduce James and distract him and make it seem to the FBI agents or CIA agents who are, you know, checking on James and seeing if everything's okay. Goldfinger has Pussy, you know, show James a good time, so it seems like he's comfortable and nothing's wrong and that they don't need to send in any help for him. And it's like, okay, sexual pawn, once again, like in the last movie, but she's willing because, like I said, she knows what she wants. She knows how she needs to get it. And, you know, she's ready to do it in her own way and kind of, you know, tantalize him without, you know, doing anything she doesn't want to do. And she's more than willing to do it. She says, okay, I'll do it. Here I go. But then, I didn't think I'd have to include a trigger warning in this video, but I do want to discuss exactly what happens in the scene. So if anyone's sensitive to discussion of SA, as I think I need to say it on YouTube, I'll put in the timestamp here that you can skip to so you don't have to hear about it. But they go in the barn and Pussy is seducing James and he's starting to get kind of handsy with her, and she, you know, fights back and it starts comedic. They're kind of throwing each other around and like flipping them over into the hay. So it starts kind of playful. But then James pins her to the hay and is fully restraining her while he begins to kiss her. And the whole time, after minutes of her, you know, refusing to consent, she continues while he's starting to do his thing to fight back and fight against him restraining her. And it goes on for a bit before finally she loosens, and I guess the implication is like she changed her mind and now she wants it. Don't take my word for it, watch the scene if you are doubting what I'm saying. And the worst part about it is the implication that only when he defies her consent altogether, she changes her mind and decides she likes it. And that is reason enough for her to entirely betray Goldfinger and no longer care about her motives or her ambitions or her plans for her own success. All it takes, as James says, was him appealing to her maternal instincts for her to completely switch course and betray Goldfinger and be the reason that James is able to succeed. I don't know if I need to explain what is so weird and problematic about it. I'm not trying to be overly sensitive or anything, but it was very disconcerting. So, you know, if you feel differently, please let me know in the comments, you know, why maybe I'm overreacting or something. But I don't think I am. So I think I have no other choice but to give the Bond girls a 1 out of 10. And that feels right. Okay, but on a better note, the villains in this movie are really, really, really good. I love Goldfinger. This is where we get to talk about my favorite moment in the entire film, and maybe one of my favorite moments in the entire series of 26 movies. When Jill Masterson gets murdered in the most iconic way, James gets knocked out and he wakes up to her laying nude on the bed, completely painted in gold. It's like the most iconic Bond moment ever. I think it's an incredibly over-the-top, dramatic, flamboyant expression of Goldfinger's power and what he's willing to do. I think it's amazing. I like his character. His obsession with gold is very interesting. In every scene, he's wearing a ton of gold jewelry and, you know, yellow, brown hues. He has an incredible death at the end. It's the type of over-the-top Bond villain death that I like. It's ridiculous, maybe a little bit cheesy, laughable, but not terribly so. So I really liked it. He gets sucked out of the private jet, which gets set up very nicely earlier when Pussy is pointing a gun at James, and he says, "You can't shoot me. Like, I know that's going to tear through the fuselage and we'll all get sucked out," and that's exactly what happened to Goldfinger. Goldfinger's main goon, Mr. Oddjob, another incredible villain, has an iconic calling card with his hat that has a razor rim. He cuts a statue's head off by merely throwing it. He's so strong. He crushes a golf ball in his hands. He kills Tilly Masterson, which I think is terrible for the plot, but, you know, shows how formidable and ruthless he is. He's very, very strong. James throws a huge bar of gold at him and it just bounces off and he doesn't react. It's great. And his death is really satisfying. His hat gets stuck in some metal bars, and when he goes to grab it, James grabs a loose wire and electrocutes him, and it's incredible. So, love the villains in this movie. They were really, really good. I think there's a little room for them to be a little more nuanced or complex, but overall, very fun, very interesting, very exciting. So I gave the villains in this movie a 9 out of 10. And then finally, the gadgets. This is what we have been waiting for. I already mentioned the bird that James wears on his head with his like scuba gear. That's just cute. But we get to see Q's gadget department in this movie, which is really fun. And James receives his iconic Aston Martin car with bulletproof windows and bulletproof plates that come up. It can spray smoke out the back. Spray smoke? Do you spray smoke? Shoot smoke? Send smoke? Send smoke out the back of the car. It can spray oil onto the road. It has machine guns that come up. It has the iconic ejector passenger seat. It has a tire shredder that comes out. And every single... Oh, and it also has a really cool GPS tracker that is used a lot throughout the movie. And every single one of the things I mentioned gets an incredible payoff. And that is key to a good gadget, is they're introduced early on. You kind of have enough time to forget about them a little bit, but they come back in a sensible, interesting, logical way, and they get used in a really exciting way, and it is just everything I would want from the gadgets in a James Bond movie. So, no notes, no complaints, perfect, incredible gadgets, get a 10 out of 10. So, if you do all of the math with these ratings, interestingly, Goldfinger ends up with a total score of 6.91 out of 10. Exactly the same score as Dr. No, which is fascinating because all of the ratings were different there, but that's just how the math works out, I guess. Which seems lower than I would have expected. But if you think about it, it makes sense because really I think the average without the Bond Girl score would be around an 8 out of 10, which seems like a perfectly reasonable score for Goldfinger because it's a really good movie overall. But I think it deserves to be brought down by how the movie treats women because it is pretty egregious. And that's how the ratings work. So Bond Girl's getting a 1 out of 10 and dragging the score down to 6.91, I think is perfectly reasonable. But yeah, that is and was Goldfinger. He's gonna lay on my lap if I don't hold him up. Oh, there he goes. Good boy. The blonde is gone. Also, I got engaged, so a lot can happen in between watching Goldfinger and Thunderball. Something funny about Thunderball is I've decided to do something like this a few times in my life where I watch all of the Bond movies in order, and I've never actually done every single one. I did most of them when I was like 12, so I've forgotten a ton. And I've tried a few times since then. The last time was maybe 4.5 years ago. I was 16. And the past 3 times I've attempted it, I got through the first 4 movies, watched Thunderball, and then stopped. So I guess something about Thunderball curses me to lose interest and stop watching, which is crazy because it's not terrible or anything, but maybe it just isn't totally for me. So let's get right into it. The plot was good. Okay, first of all, the opening of the movie is incredible. It's probably my favorite part of the entire movie. It's very iconic. It opens on a coffin with the initials JB. So for a second you're like, but then you see James up in the balcony watching, and you're seeing the widow of this person who's died pay her respects. James goes to pay his respects and then punches her in the face. It's revealed that the widow is actually the man who was presumably dead. It's crazy. It's great. They fight. James beats him up, throws some flowers on him, flies away on a jetpack. It's good shit. It's amazing. And then we actually get into the main plot of the movie, which was good. I enjoyed it. It's another fun Spectre plot. This time they're stealing nukes and ransoming them for diamonds, lest they blow up a city in the United States or in England. And that's pretty crazy. Those are some pretty high stakes. So it was enjoyable to see. The Spectre room is super, super cool. This time the main villain of the movie is number 2, which is crazy. His name is Emilio Largo, I believe. We get a little more of Blofeld from the neck down with his cat, continuing to tease him. From Russia with Love, we had number 3. This time we had number 2. Next movie, number 1. More likely than you think. Most of the movie takes place in Nassau, in the Bahamas, and it was good. It was fine. I think the plot of this movie was overall pretty static. There weren't really a lot of changes or shocks. It was kind of slow moving and very linear. And the thing about this movie is that there are a lot of underwater sequences, which I get it, that's like the whole thing of this movie. I don't know if there's something wrong with me. My fiance was watching it right next to me, and he also thought that the underwater sequences were really boring. They drag on for a really long time. There's no dialogue. even when they're fighting, when there's action, it's just kind of easy to get confused and lost in the sauce. I found myself like checking how much longer was left in the movie way more than I would have liked to. So all of that said, I gave the plot a 5 out of 10 because it was very mid. So it gets a very middling score from me. On a better note, the intro of this film was absolutely my favorite we've had so far, which is saying something because the one in Goldfinger was really, really iconic, but there was just something about this one that was really exciting. It actually gave me chills watching it. First of all, the theme song is great. Thunderball, the eponymous track, is really, really good, really exciting and dramatic in typical James Bond intro fashion. There's these naked female silhouettes swimming through this technicolor water as the credits scroll, and the graphics of the credits were timed really well with the music, and it was really cool. I was glued to the screen the whole time. It was awesome. I love all the stuff with the harpoons and the bubbles, and they really make good use of the water here. This was my favorite underwater sequence in the movie because it wasn't boring. So I gave the intro a 7 out of 10. Room to improve, room for more excitement, but this one was really, really good, and like I said, my favorite so far. Alright, the Bond girls. As far as the movie's treatment of women, I'd say it started poor, but ended on a high note. Unfortunately, like we saw in Goldfinger, there is a fair amount of coercion and assault that James does early in the film with the more minor female characters. Things like just grabbing them and forcing a kiss on them, and then shoving him off and being really upset about it, and then magically changing their minds and deciding to sleep with him. Some might say that's like the James Bond thing, but I don't have to like it if it is, and I think that we can expect more from him, and that's not unfair to say. But one of the main Bond girls of the film, her name is Domino, I really, really liked. She was an interesting character. Her interactions with James were actually pretty romantic because she was interested and he didn't have to coerce her into sleeping with him. She and James actually end up fucking in the water with like scuba gear on, which is insane. They like float behind this coral reef and there's a copious amount of bubbles that shoot up from behind it. It's great. It's amazing stuff. And she ends up killing the villain of the film with a harpoon. I guess he doesn't die immediately from the harpoon, but it enables them to get away, and then he crashes the boat and it blows up, and it's a really cool moment for her, especially because minutes before she is taken advantage of by the main villain of the film, Largo, so she gets to have her revenge, which is really awesome to see. The other main girl in the film is Fiona Volpe. She is an agent for Spectre. She is super badass. She is a force to be reckoned with. I loved her character. She was extremely cool. There's a really good moment where she sleeps with James, and in the morning she ends up betraying him and kidnapping him to take him to Largo and Spectre. And she has this really interesting moment where she says something like, just because you're James Bond, do you think you can sleep with a woman and have her turn to the good side and suddenly do what you want her to do? And I was like, okay, there's some direct shade for Pussy Galore, which did exactly that in the last film. And her death is really interesting because James escapes and she's trying to get him back into their custody, and she ends up dancing with him on the dance floor while they're actually trying to kill him at this point. There's a gun being aimed at James, and they're gonna time the shot of the pistol to the drums that are being played on the dance floor, and James realizes at the last minute and turns around, and it ends up hitting her instead. which is a really shocking and crazy moment. So it sounds weird to say this after that, but in spite of what happens early in the movie's overall treatment of women and characterization of the main female characters is pretty strong, ultimately. I don't want to ignore the gross things James does in the beginning, but I don't want to fault the movie too much for those because they are pretty fleeting. So I gave the score for the Bond girls in this movie a 7 out of 10. Now for the main villain of the film, number 2, Inspector. His name is Largo. He is really cool. He has some really awesome signature Bond villain calling cards, like his eye patch and his affinity for sharks and the way he uses them to execute people. He's very cold, very unfeeling. He's an enjoyable character to see on screen. You really get the sense that nothing can faze him. But he's not that deeply explored or nuanced. He's really just another Spectre agent that's doing what Blofeld is telling him to do, which is fine, but it doesn't make for a complex or tortured villain. We don't really get much about his backstory or why he's a part of Spectre, other than he wants power, he wants to cause global chaos. It's like, okay, cool, but why? So, not bad by any means. I love Spectre. I think Spectre stuff is really interesting, but unfortunately, he's not the most interesting part of Spectre, in spite of being number 2, second in command to Blofeld himself. So that being said, I gave the villain of this movie a 6 out of 10. And then the gadgets in this movie. At first I thought there might not be any because James just goes straight to Nassau and never visits with Q before he leaves. So I thought the only gadget in the movie would be the jetpack at the very beginning, which is incredible. We also get the return of the Aston Martin, which sprays water out the back like a fire hose and, you know, washes some goons away while James is trying to escape. So that's pretty cool. And to my pleasant surprise, Q does show up in Nassau to equip James with some pretty cool gadgets. He gets a watch with a Geiger counter in it, a waterproof camera, whoa, crazy, a flare gun, a little breather that just fits in his mouth and gives him a few minutes of air, and a pill that James can swallow that either the CIA or MI6 can then in turn use to track James and find wherever he is if he needs help. So there are some cool gadgets in this movie. They're nothing particularly special or iconic other than the jetpack, which is just so fun and so amazing. But other than that, there wasn't really a ton going on. The gadgets were really just like tools that aren't like that creative or anything, but he uses all of them in practical ways that help him accomplish his goal. So, you know, kind of as a microcosm for the movie as a whole, it's good, nothing amazing, but it also isn't bad. So I gave the gadgets a respectable 6 out of 10. And now, if we average all of the scores according to the way that I am weighting them and calculating these averages, Thunderball gets a total score of 6 out of 10. This shirt is tighter than I remember it. I am so excited to talk about this one. I mean, no spoilers, we'll get into each and every category in turn, but this movie was so effing good. Oh my god, where do I even begin? Well, I begin with the plot, like always. I've been trying to zoom out on my plot analysis a little more instead of just talking about every single moment that I liked. You know, I want to analyze the film as a whole and kind of have a more macro analysis of things, but I simply can't resist telling you all of the incredible moments that happen in this film. First of all, the movie opens in space, which is a thrilling first for 007. He's not there. He's not in space yet. Well, he doesn't go to space in this one. Later movies. But it's an incredibly exciting and visually appealing opening with these NASA astronauts in their space capsule getting swallowed by another larger space capsule and essentially getting kidnapped while they're in space. It's crazy. And we don't really know why or what's going on, so it's an amazingly intriguing opening to the film. And then we cut to James in bed with a woman, like he so often is, and he dies. The bed flips into the wall, it gets riddled with bullets, and then it unfolds and he's dead. It's shocking. It comes out of nowhere. I mean, the name of the film, I guess maybe you could have guessed. If you only live twice, you have to die once before you live the second time. But it is crazy. But then we see his funeral. His body gets sent into the ocean and floats down, but then it gets picked up, brought to a submarine, and he emerges alive. His death was faked in order to make his espionage more effective, which is really, really cool. And it's so cool to see him emerge out of his body bag, essentially, into the submarine, and then he walks through a door, and it's the familiar office, secretary office at Moneypenny, leading into M's personal office, but it's all like a little bit nautical themed because it's on a submarine. It's really fun. It's really cute. I loved it. And then 007 goes to Japan, which, you know, a big part of the Bond series as a whole is, you know, visiting thrilling, interesting foreign locations, and Japan is an amazing place to go. And then the movie is just chock full of incredibly engaging action moments. There truly was not a dull moment in this film at all. And there's a lot of thrilling twists and turns that happen that will make you gasp more than once. The choreo of the action scenes is really well done, whether it's a fist fight or a car chase. At one point, James is getting pursued in a car, and the Japanese Secret Service, who James is working with, sort of like Japan's MI6, which is really, really awesome to see, gets the car chasing him, gets picked up by an electromagnetic crane attached to a helicopter sent by the Japanese Secret Service, and the car gets carried away and dropped into the sea. It's insane. It's so cool. The entire film is so dynamic. The cinematography is amazing. It really stood out with this one, especially compared to Thunderball. And, you know, the driving conflict of the story is very mysterious. We're seeing things happening, like these various space capsules getting captured by someone, but we don't know who. Right, as if we don't know who. But, you know, people at large don't know who or why it's happening exactly. Turns out it's a Spectre plot to pit Russia and the United States against each other, even more during an already tense Cold War era. And, you know, typical textbook Spectre stuff. But the information is disseminated little by little, so it remains intriguing throughout. You don't get to know too much all at once. Our first glimpses of the Spectre base are incredible. That's another really strong thing in this film, is the set design. All of the sets are grand and massive and gorgeous. And the Spectre base, I think, is the best example of that. I love Blofeld. Crazy that he's here. We'll talk about him later. I love his apartment so much, with the piranhas and the bridge and the art. It is just amazing. James ends up going to the Japanese Secret Service's Ninja Training Academy, which is amazing. The ninjas are super cool. We get to see them have a lot of cool fights and see how their training works and how formidable they are.
You're so lonely.
I know. God forbid I make a video without you. We're filming. We're talking about James. Oh, hold on. There is an interesting part of the scheme where they're trying to help James assimilate into Japanese culture and allow him to infiltrate this island where the Spectre base is, without being suspected as a British agent. So they do give him a bit of a makeover. They give him different eyebrows and like a haircut to make him look more Japanese, which, you know, of course gives you a little bit of pause. I believe they also darkened his skin a little bit for him to look more Japanese. The way that they make him over does definitely align with stereotypical Japanese features. I think it's important to at least acknowledge it. The last half an hour of the film is absolutely incredible. I mean, it already was so far, but it just gets ramped up even more. The infiltration of the Spectre base is so thrilling and awesome. It turns out this volcano that the Spectre base is under is completely dormant. It's not a real volcano. And what appears to be sort of like a geyser lake is actually fake. It's a retractable landing site, which is so cool. James sees the water, throws a rock at it, and it clunk bounces across it. He starts walking across it, it opens up, he infiltrates the base, he meets Blofeld face to face. The climax is just exciting on so many levels. It ends with a big kaboom where the whole base blows up. And like any good Bond movie, it ends with him having sex in a boat. So clearly, overall, I really, really loved the plot of this movie. It checked all of my boxes. It was really so enjoyable to watch and so interesting front to back. Turns out this movie is based on the Ian Fleming novel of the same name, but the story doesn't really follow that of the novel that closely, which is interesting. Something that surprised me when I was watching the intro, which we'll get to in a second, is that the screenplay for the film was written by Roald Dahl, the same author as Matilda, which is so interesting. And let me just say, he did a hell of a job. So this is a first for the series, but I feel very confident in giving the plot for this movie a 10 out of 10. It was so good. Unfortunately, the plot ranking does not a total score make. There are other categories to consider, and there is the intro. First of all, I adore the theme song for the movie. It's sung by Nancy Sinatra, one of my favorites. The song gives me chills, especially the way it's faded into after we see James dead in bed. It's a gorgeous song. I sang along the whole time. I adore it. I love her voice. So that's a big pro of the intro. But unfortunately, the intro graphics were not that interesting. There was a lot of like burbling lava and spinning Japanese wheels and, you know, silhouettes of Japanese women, you know, all the typical Hallmark Bond intro things. But they weren't interesting. It was pretty, but not more than that. Which is a damn shame because I've already talked about how much I adored this movie. But if I'm being fair, if I'm being disciplined with myself, this was not the best intro we've seen so far. So unfortunately, I think I can only give it a 3 out of 10. There just wasn't that much going on. And all the points it did get are from Nancy Sinatra's gorgeous voice, so congratulations to her. The Bond girl category, the movie's treatment of women. First of all, it actually, interestingly, all of the like questionable stuff happens at the beginning, and then it gets really good and remains good till the end of the movie. So let me start with the stuff. The first thing James says in this movie when he's in bed right before he dies, maybe he deserves to die for saying this. Just kidding. But he's making out with someone, and he says, and I quote, "Why do Chinese girls taste different?" Oh, James, you just can't resist. And, you know, I don't feel like that's horribly egregious, but, you know, it is very 1967. And then later, when James is first meeting the head of Japanese Secret Service, Tiger, he introduces James to all of his women, basically his harem, his assistants. He refers to them as his possessions. He says, in Japan, men come first and women come second. Which is just like, I don't know, little doses of misogyny like that are framed as intrinsically Japanese and sort of like imbued into Japanese culture. I don't know a lot about Japanese culture. Maybe it's true, maybe it's faithful. But James is all for it. He loves it. He says, works for me. I should come here more often. But I do think the film largely redeems itself with the two main Bond girls. The first one we have is Aki. She is, I wrote in my notes that she's an agent ×2 because she is indeed an agent of the Japanese Secret Service. So she's really brave. She's super badass. Oftentimes she's doing the driving and the car chases and, you know, all of these incredible things. So it's really cool to see a strong female character like that. But she's also an agent in the sense that she is a fully embodied character that makes her own decisions, has her own ambitions and desires. She's interested in James. They have their fun together, and of course that's allowed. But I appreciate that she's not coerced into it, which we've seen too many times in this series so far. Unfortunately, and it's a really powerful, shocking moment actually, but she gets killed. And, you know, I think a sign of a good film and a good character is when a character dies and it feels impactful, and it definitely did. And then the second Bond girl in this movie is James. As part of his assimilation into Japanese culture, is assigned to marry a Japanese woman that lives on the island where the Spectre base is. So he marries her. She's beautiful, in spite of them warning him that she has a face like a pig. Weird. But she's gorgeous. They don't have sex on their honeymoon. When she tells him that they're sleeping in separate beds, he almost throws a fit. But the next day they do attempt having sex in a field, but they get interrupted by Spectre. I really liked, unfortunately, I don't know her name, so either that's a blind spot on my part, or she isn't given one. I'll put in the editing if she has one. I apologize for not knowing it, but they didn't make it clear. But similar to Aki, she is also an agent ×2. She's an agent with the Japanese Secret Service. Super similarly strong and badass. And also she knows what she wants. When they do end up, you know, making out with each other and she relents a little bit to his advances, it's clear that she wants it and that it's not coercion. She's not doing anything she's uncomfortable with. So it's a romantic, fun, and sexy moment, which is what we want in a Bond film. All of that being said, you know, I can't totally ignore the questionable things that are said about women in this movie, but the two main Bond girls are really, really strong characters, really interesting. I really adored them. There's definitely more room for them to be developed, so I gave the Bond girls and the movie's treatment of women a very respectable 7 out of 10. The villains in this movie, this is a very interesting one because for most of the movie we don't have one. It turns out that the driving force behind this plot, like any Spectre plot, but especially in this film, is number 1, Blofeld himself. But we don't get to see him till like the last 40 minutes of the movie or so. Maybe we do get glimpses of him before that, but we actually see him and speak to him later in the movie. So I'll talk about that in a second. Before Blofeld, the main villain we get to encounter is, in my view, the most actively participating villain anyway, is number 11 of Spectre, who is an incredible character. I love her. She uses her sexiness to her advantage and seduces James, and, you know, thereby convinces him to get on a plane with her. And then she hits a button and things come out and tie James to his seat, and she jumps out of the fucking plane and parachutes down while the plane nosedives into the ground, which is incredibly badass, super cool. James ends up freeing himself and pulling up the plane and grinding to a halt on a landing strip. It's a really, really awesome moment. And then, as a result of her failure to kill 007, Blofeld drops her into a pool of piranhas, and it's horrific. And speaking of Blofeld, he is a pretty good villain. His voice is very foreboding. You're definitely uncomfortable anytime he's on screen. His face reveal is an incredible moment, especially because we've been teased every movie so far. Well, not every movie, but most of them. Unfortunately, I don't know if I'm off about this, but the acting for Blofeld, the actor playing him, came off as a little bit strange. Like, a lot of his lines sounded dry and kind of reminded you that you were watching a movie, which is unfortunate, especially compared to the other villains we've seen in the series so far, who have really, really strong actors playing them. So that's unfortunate. It definitely drew away from the impact of Blofeld as a villain. Okay, I have to say, side note, is Blofeld gay? The way he said things and how he said them. Also, his right-hand man is a very sexy man named Hans, who I think they have a bit of a thing going on, and that's just not me projecting, although, you know, I want to do that for sure. But I don't know. If anyone else has thoughts about Blofeld's sexuality, let me know. I'm interested. But besides all of that, you know, he is the head of Spectre, which is very cool, but his motives aren't that profound or explored. It's just like, I'm the head of Spectre. Spectre causes chaos. That's what I'm doing. But we don't know why he is the way he is. We don't get any backstory from him. So even though he's cool, the so-so acting and lack of depth with the character, I think, draw away from how we perceive Blofeld in this movie. So all of that being said, I think the villains deserve a 6 out of 10 for this movie, which is unfortunate. I wish it was higher, but some really good moments and then some dry moments kind of give it a middling score of 6 out of 10. But to end on a high note, the gadgets in this movie are absolutely incredible. James uses a really awesome safe breaker early in the film, which is just really cool to look at, and seeing him use it is really awesome. His unfoldable helicopter, Little Nelly, who is equipped with guns and rockets and missiles and flames and smoke and mines. Oh my! It is so awesome. He uses each of those gadgets in turn in a really satisfying and thrilling way. The helicopter fight scene is one of the best moments of the entire film. So Little Nelly gets her moment to shine. When James is infiltrating the base, he uses a suction suit where on his knees and hands, I believe, he has these suction cups that allow him to, you know, crawl across the ceiling and down the wall, which is just incredible espionage movie stuff. I love it. And then one of my favorite gadgets so far, maybe my absolute favorite, because I think it is just so iconic, is the cigarette gun, which is, I guess it's not a gun, it's more like a it's a rocket, it's a bullet, where, you know, it looks like a normal cigarette, and then you light it, and wherever it's pointing, it shoots out a bullet, and it explodes and annihilates whatever it's pointed at. And James uses it in an incredible way. These villains have got to stop letting him have a cigarette. It didn't work out for Agent Grant, it didn't work out for Blofeld, so they should know better at this point, but I guess they don't. So it pleases me to say that the gadgets get a glowing score of 10 out of 10. I have no notes. They were perfect. I loved them. So if I calculate the average for all of those scores in the way that I'm doing it, You Only Live Twice gets a total score of 7.45 out of 10, which is the highest score any movie has received so far, and it absolutely deserves it. This was unequivocally my favorite film I've seen so far. It really blew me away. I know I've seen it before, but like I said, it's been quite a while, and I didn't remember it being this damn good, but it was, and I absolutely adored it. So, you know, out of all the films so far, if you're only gonna watch one, watch this one. But you know, I'm already tempted to watch this one again. It was just that good. We'll see what Diamonds Are Forever is like, which is the last Connery one. I don't think I've ever really worn these. I just grabbed them when I was obsessed with collecting earrings when I was like 17. But if ever there's a time to wear them, it's when I'm talking about Diamonds Are Forever. So here they are. They're not real though. I apologize if the lighting like looks a lot different than it has in the video thus far. It's a pretty gloomy day today, and I don't know when the sun's gonna come back out, so I just have to film. So sorry that the lighting is a little bit inconsistent, but I think we'll all survive. Okay, Diamonds Are Forever, the final Sean Connery, James Bond film that people care about and talk about, because Never Say Never Again is a massive flop. And speaking of massive flops, you guys, I didn't like this one. I don't even really know where to begin, and I always say this and I always end up in the same place, which is the plot, what we always talk about first. A reminder, the plot category is kind of just the place for me to talk about the experience of the film as a whole, largely related to the plot and the story, but also just the action sequences, the costumes, the writing, the cinematography, all of that good stuff. But there is none of that good stuff because I did not enjoy this movie, which is a damn shame, because you've seen in the video so far that I have a great capacity to adore these movies, even when they're a little bit funky, but this one just did not do it for me. This movie was just weird. Like, the cinematography was bad. Much of the acting was awful. It was boring. It was uninteresting. It was uncomfortable at times. Another word I would use to describe the movie is clunky. Just from the writing to the camera work all around, it just felt off. I don't know. I find it harder to articulate myself when I don't like something. It's a lot easier for me to explain why I love something or why I think something's really interesting or compelling, but I just don't have a lot to say about it. Like, I was bored. It was uninteresting. It wasn't fun. It didn't give me that feeling that I want a Bond movie to give me. I mean, truly, anytime I go into a movie, I like to go in with the assumption that it's going to be the best thing I've ever seen. Not in a way that raises my expectations too high, but that just kind of opens me up to receiving a film for whatever it is and appreciate whatever artistry is presented to me, because I like to like things. I think that art will give you as much as you're willing to give it. So I really tried to give myself over to this movie, but it just didn't give me anything back. I do want to mention some things in this movie that I did like, because it wasn't all bad. There were a couple of redeeming things that I enjoyed and helped me survive the 2-hour runtime. I think the driving conflict of the story is interesting. It's this huge worldwide diamond smuggling scheme that James is taking part of by pretending to be someone else known as Frank's. And it takes him all over the world. He goes from South Africa to Amsterdam to Las Vegas. And the Vegas vibes were fun. Definitely added extra weirdness to an already weird movie, but I like Vegas vibes. I think it's a good time. James almost gets cremated, which is horrifying. Not a fear I knew that I had, but now I do. And let me tell you, this movie was horny more than any other we've had before. There were a lot, I don't know what are these movies rated? I was under the presumption that they're all rated PG. It doesn't say. If you want to see nipples, watch this one. And not just Sean Connery's nipples, because we always get to see those, which is wonderful. But like, I think like 4 or 5 different women bear all, which is nice, but it was shocking. I wasn't expecting it, so there you go. And there's a great moment when James is, about to spend the night with a beautiful woman at a casino in Vegas. Her name is Plenty O'Toole. I don't think I totally get the joke there. Plenty O'Toole. I don't know. Plenty O'Toole. I don't get, can someone explain it to me? But he's about to lay down with Miss Plenty, and he turns the lights on, and there are people in the room to apprehend James, and he says, "You've caught me with more than my hands up," which was pretty hilarious in my opinion. But then they grab Plenty, they pick her up, and they throw her out the window of this hotel, and she happens to land in the pool, and she survives before she dies like 10 minutes later, also in a pool, in a different pool. And then James goes into the bedroom and finds the other Bond girl of the movie, who we'll talk more about later, Tiffany Case. And James undresses in front of her, and she is like astonished and doesn't mince her words when she says that she's very impressed by the amount of what she sees. It was shocking. This movie was so steamy. And, I enjoy that. James did not coerce anybody into sleeping with him, which is a wonderful thing. He has sex on a bed that is just fully a fish tank. Like, the whole thing is glass. It looks extremely uncomfortable. But it's very Vegas glamour. And what else would you expect from Las Vegas but glamour that is so sickeningly over the top? I really liked the action sequence where James is attempting to get to the penthouse of the hotel to see the owner, who has locked himself up in there and is moving a lot of the parts of the diamond smuggling scheme. And James can't get in the elevator, so he crawls out of the building and gets on top of the elevator, which is I guess the elevator shaft lies on the side of the building, which is wild, but James rides it to the top, and it's very intense, it's very scary. And then he, grapples, has like a grappling gun that attaches to his waist, and he swings on the side of the building and scales it to the top, and it's really cool. Like, that was one of the best examples of a good action sequence in this movie. There were a few car chases. There was a chase with a moon rover, which was very strange. Not on the moon, but James was in a moon rover on Earth, like in the Mojave Desert. And the people that are chasing him are on motorized tricycles. I guess it's not a tricycle. I'm sure there's a word for a 3-wheeled motorized vehicle, but tricycle is all I know. And those scenes were fine, but they just weren't that interesting or that exciting. It turns out that the diamonds are being smuggled to build a diamond satellite that can shoot lasers and blow up nukes anywhere Spectre wants around the world. Blofeld is back. He's cloned. We'll talk about that more in a bit. I wanted to mention the things that I appreciate about the plot, because there definitely wasn't nothing. But it really... this would be at the very bottom of my personal ranking so far. Like, I would not want to watch it again. I just did not have a good time with it. And it's the day after Christmas. I'm supposed to be in a good mood. So, all of that being said, I gave the plot a rating of 3 out of 10. There were enough redeemable aspects to put it above a 1 or a 2. but even a 4 would simply be too high in my personal opinion. And these are all subjective. Big surprise. So I'm allowed, and that is just how I felt about it. So 3 out of 10. The intro for this one, similarly to the plot, there's not really much to say. It was just kind of like, okay. The song is nice. I like it. It has that sort of James Bond spy music mode. It's fun. It sounds nice. But the intro is simultaneously static and jarring. It goes from just a lot of dry, really dark shots so you can't really see like what is on the screen, and then it kind of jumps to some other ones and then stays for a bit, and it was just a very unpleasant viewing experience. It was a bit awkward, it was dull, it was dark, and much like the movie as a whole, I didn't care for it very much. So I gave the intro a 2 out of 10 for the song only. I had to throw the song a bone because it was a nice song. It wasn't a tremendous song, but it was nice. So the intro gets a 2 out of 10. Man, I probably seem like I'm in such a terrible mood, but I wasn't before I watched the movie. Okay, the Bond girls, the movie's treatment of women. There's really only one major female character in the movie. Her name is Tiffany Case, which is a very cute name. I really like the story behind her name. She was born in a Tiffany store when her mom was going to get a wedding ring, I believe. So that's just a wonderful origin story. And I liked her character. She was fully formed, she was independent, but it's almost as if she starts off strong and then kind of gets worse throughout the movie. She's strong when she's opposed to James and she's fully in on this diamond smuggling plot, and she's moving a lot of the pieces and making a lot of the decisions. But then once James sort of wins her over onto his side, she becomes very boring, and she just follows orders and loses all of the agency she demonstrated in the first half of the film. James slaps her when he's upset. He calls her a bitch. Blofeld in particular objectifies her quite a bit. And yes, he's a villain, so maybe that's supposed to come off as really gross and bad, but he doesn't say things that are much different than what James would say, so it comes off a little weirdly. I already mentioned Plenty O'Toole. She was very cute. She had this sickly sweet voice. She was very, very American, and I liked her a lot, but pretty quickly she gets thrown out of a window and then drowned in a pool. So you don't get to see her for very long, no time for her to develop or be an interesting character. Later on, James meets Bambi and Thumper, which is hilarious. There's not really much to their characters. They're just acrobats that try to kill James, and then he gets the upper hand and you never hear from them again. So that's really all there is to say about the Bond girls. I gave the movie's treatment of women a 4 out of 10. The villains, don't even get me started. Okay, if my explanation during the plot section didn't demonstrate to you enough why I didn't like this movie, this certainly will. Who should I talk about first? Let's talk about Blofeld first. He's back. Remember in You Only Live Twice, he got away, he escaped. He was in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which I have not talked about in this video yet, but I have watched it. He makes it out alive at the end in a twist, but without spoiling it or getting into it now, he does some pretty crazy things in that movie that would almost certainly be mentioned in this film if On Her Majesty's Secret Service was canon to the Connery line of films, but I'm pretty sure that it isn't, because nothing in On Her Majesty's Secret Service is even acknowledged, and it would be. So, Blofeld's back, and the big gag of the movie is that Blofeld has been cloning himself. Not exactly cloning, but the people below him are getting plastic surgery to look exactly like him. He's been recast. This is already the fourth actor, maybe more, third actor whose face we see, but Blofeld was in the earlier movies as well. But he's yet another actor to play Blofeld. And he was just fine, very generic villain vibes. He's mean, he's bad. That's really about it. The clone thing is interesting. I think it's fun. There's a good moment where James in order to find out who the real Blofeld is, he goes to kick Blofeld's cat. The cat jumps into Blofeld's arms, James shoots him in the face, and he dies. And then the other Blofeld in the room is like, wow, that was really smart. But then the actual cat comes out wearing a diamond collar. So it turns out the cats are being cloned too. And that was a fun moment. That was cool. But really, there wasn't much to his character. I didn't really care that much about him, especially compared to the past two movies, where I think he was a fairly interesting character and enjoyable to see on screen. But this one was just kind of nothing. And then the other two main villains of this film. Where do I even begin? So, their names are Kid and Wint, and from the get-go, they are so unpleasant to see on screen. They have this really creepy, gross vibe about them, and not in like a compelling villain way where you're disturbed by them but you're still really interested. These guys, you almost want to just like fast forward till they're not on the screen anymore because they're so vile. Their acting is absolutely atrocious in my opinion. And it seems pretty clearly implied that both of these characters are gay. They hold hands at the end of their first scene together as they walk away. Wint has a fixation on perfume. He's always spraying it on himself. Kid makes a comment about a flight attendant, I believe, and he says, she's kind of pretty for a lady. So I think those are our signs that these are queer characters. And it's almost played like for laughs, or less so for laughs and more so for an added level of disgust and perversion. I'm interested to hear what other people have to say about their characterization. I don't know, it's hard to know what to say about it because I joked when we talked about You Only Live Twice that I think Blofeld is queer, which I stand by in that film, but in the two subsequent films he absolutely is not, so that's over and done with. So we have a couple of queer main characters in this movie, I think the very first for the Bond series as a whole, and they're just awful. Like, they were my least favorite characters out of any Bond film in living memory. So hopefully that's explanation enough for why I gave the villains in this movie a 1 out of 10. And then the gadgets, once again, a lot like the other categories, there isn't much to talk about. James wears a false thumbprint in order to assume the role of Frank's, and when Tiffany pulls his fingerprints, it matches with the one she has on record, which is like, whoa, how'd he do that? And then he has, the false thumbprint on, which is cool. It's interesting. There's some fun voice synthesizer action in this movie where it turns out that Blofeld has been impersonating the owner of the casino throughout the film. Bond, in turn, uses a similar voice synthesizer to imitate an American talking to Blofeld to get some secret information from him. I mentioned the grappling hooks on the side of the building earlier, but beyond that, there really isn't much as far as gadgets go. The couple that we had were cute, they were fine, but they weren't anything groundbreaking or all that special. So I gave the gadgets a score of 2 out of 10. So I apologize for all of the negative vibes I've been hurling at this film. We're just about done with it, but if you total all of those scores together, according to the formula that I have been using so far, Diamonds Are Forever gets a very depressing score, but deserved score of 2.54 out of 10. Okay. Reset your vibes. We're no longer talking about Diamonds Are Forever. I'll take these out to cleanse the aura in the room. But that is all 6 of the Sean Connery James Bond films. I thoroughly enjoyed these movies overall. So in spite of my critiques and hot takes I've offered along the way, I think that these movies are wonderful. They established the foundation for the decade-long history of the Bond film series. They were the wonderful first brave adaptations of the Ian Fleming novels from page to screen, and the world has never been the same since. The influence of these movies is far beyond what you can comprehend. Bond is everywhere. It's impossible to make a spy movie out all these days that wasn't at least a little bit spiritually influenced by these very movies. Yes, there was plenty of sexism. Yes, these movies absolutely appeal to the male gaze more than most. And yes, some moments in these movies have absolutely aged like milk. But there were also really strong plots, thrilling moments of espionage, incredible action sequences, interesting villains, really exciting moments, hilarious jokes from James, really strong and fabulous women. Got to see numerous hotel rooms that I would die to be able to stay in. And all along the way, we got to listen to Sean Connery's tremendously charming voice and gaze at his astonishingly handsome mug. So in order to visually represent all of the ratings I gave and compare the movies to each other, I'm just gonna put it all up on the screen over my face as I'm saying them, so that by the end you can pause it, scrutinize it, look at it. I'll color code it and make it pretty so that it's easy to compare things. I think looking at the numbers is really fun. And the whole reason I'm rating the movies anyway is to be able to make interesting numerical comparisons like this and see. So in our first most important category of the plot, in order from lowest score to highest score, we have Diamonds Are Forever with 3 out of 10, Thunderball with 5, From Russia with Love 7, Goldfinger 8, Dr. No 9, You Only Live Twice 10. Then we have the second category, the intro, the opening credit sequences, and once again from least to greatest, Diamonds Are Forever 2, You Only Live Twice 3, From Russia with Love 4, Dr. No 4, Thunderball 7, Goldfinger 7. Whenever films had the same numerical score, I did rank them relative to each other according to my personal opinions about their quality. Bond Girls, these films' treatment of women. Goldfinger 1, From Russia with Love 3, Diamonds Are Forever 4, Thunderball 7, You Only Live Twice 7, Dr. No 8. Isn't it fascinating that the very first James Bond film has the highest score for the treatment and characterization of female characters so far? I think that's pretty astonishing. Villains, we have Diamonds Are Forever 1, Thunderball 6, From Russia with Love 6, You Only Live Twice 6, Dr. No 7, Goldfinger 9. And then finally our gadgets category, we have Dr. No 2, Diamonds Are Forever 2, From Russia with Love 3, Thunderball 6, You Only Live Twice 10, Goldfinger 10. Averaging up all of those scores, we get the definitive numerical, mathematical rankings of these films as a whole against each other, considering all of those categories, and we are left with Diamonds Are Forever 2.54, From Russia with Love 5.18, Thunderball 6, Dr. No 6.91, Goldfinger 6.91, and finally, You Only Live Twice 7.45. Okay, pause this if you want to look at it. I'll leave it up for a few seconds, but I'm gonna move on and close the video out. So pause this, screenshot it if you want to send hate mail. So there you have it, everybody. That concludes part 1 of my deep dive analysis of every single officially licensed James Bond film. I am over the moon excited to move on to the other actors, see how their films compare, what gets better over time, what gets worse over time, how the series evolves. And we're going to continue on that journey in part 2, which should be coming out pretty soon because there's only one movie to analyze. It will be George Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I'm putting a ton of work into these and I'm having a wonderful time doing it. but it just makes it all the more rewarding to know if people are seeing it and engaging with it. So like, comment, subscribe so you see the next one, whatever, all that good stuff. I can't wait to see you guys again soon, and we will talk again in part 2, the George Lazenby film. Just one.